The Journey of the Three Kings is taken from the book titled, Life of the Blessed Virgin Mary, by Mystic and Catherine Emmerich. This video will focus almost exclusively on the three kings found within her writings. This means that parts of the original text, focusing on other items, may be left out for the sake of brevity. Let us now begin with the Journey of the Three Kings. In the last few days I often saw the kings on their journey. The road was more hilly, and they came over the hills which I had seen covered with little pieces of stone like broken pottery. I should very much like to have some of them, they are so beautifully smooth. On other mountains in that region are many white transparent stones like birds' eggs, and a quantity of white sand. I saw the kings now in the place where they afterwards lived when Jesus visited them in the 3rd year of his ministry. They were not in the city of tents, for at that time it did not exist. December 17th. Today, late in the evening, I saw the kings arrive in a little town of scattered houses, many of which were surrounded by high fences. It seemed to me that this was the first Jewish town they came to. Bethlehem was in a straight line from here, but they went off to the right, I suppose because the only road led in that direction. As they approached this place they sang particularly loudly and beautifully, and were full of joy, for the star shone unusually brightly here. It was like moonlight and one could see quite clearly the shadows which it cast. The inhabitants seemed either not to see the star or to take no special interest in it, but they were good people and extremely helpful. Some of the travelers had dismounted, and the inhabitants helped them to water their beasts. It made me think of Abraham's times, when all men were so good and helpful. Several of the inhabitants, bearing branches, led the travelers through the town and went some of the way with them. I did not see the star always shining brightly before them, sometimes it was quite dim. It seemed to shine more brightly in places where good people lived, and when the travelers saw that it was very brilliant, they were greatly excited and thought that perhaps the Messiah might be in that place. December 18th. This morning they passed by a dark, misty city without stopping, and soon after crossed a river flowing into the Dead Sea. In the last two places many of the rabble which had followed them stayed behind. I had a distinct impression that someone had taken refuge in one of these two places in a conflict before the reign of Solomon. They crossed the river this morning and now came onto a good road. December 19th to 21st, this evening I saw the kings on this side of this river. Their generosity had attracted so many followers that their train must have numbered 200. They were nearing the town which was approached by Jesus on its western side on July 31st in the 2nd year of his ministry, though he did not enter it. Its name sounded like Manathea, Metania, Madana, or Madian. It had a mixed population of heathens and Jews. They were evil people, and though a high road led through the town, they would not let the kings go through. They led them outside the town, on the eastern side, to a place enclosed by walls, where there were sheds and stables. The kings put up their tents here, fed and watered their beasts, and prepared a meal for themselves. On Thursday the 20th and Friday the 21st I saw the kings resting here, but they were greatly distressed because here, as in the last town, nobody knew or cared about the newborn king. I heard them telling the inhabitants in a very friendly way a great deal about the cause of their long journey and all the circumstances attending it. Of what I heard I recollect this much. They had received the announcement about the newborn king a very long time ago. I think it must have been not long after Job's time and before Abraham went to Egypt, when an army of some 3,000 Medes from Job's country, they lived in other parts as well, came as far as the region of Heliopolis in a campaign against Egypt. I cannot now clearly recollect why they had advanced so far, but I think their campaign was in aid of someone. It was not, however, for a good purpose. They were attacking something holy, whether holy men or a religious mystery connected with the fulfillment of the promise, I cannot remember. Near Heliopolis an angel appeared to several of their leaders at once, warning them to go no farther. He spoke to them of a Redeemer who was to be born of a virgin and would be worshipped by their descendants. This was connected, I cannot remember how, with a command that they should advance no farther but should go home and observe the stars. After this I saw them arranging joyful feasts in Egypt, setting up triumphal arches and altars, and decorating them with flowers. Then they went home. They were Median star worshippers, exceptionally tall, almost like giants, of very noble stature and of a beautiful yellowish-brown color. They journeyed with their herds from place to place and imposed their will everywhere by their great strength. I have forgotten the name of their chief prophet. They were much given to prophesying, and the taking of omens from animals. Often on their journeys animals would suddenly place themselves across their road, standing with outstretched legs and letting themselves be killed rather than go away. That was an omen for them, and they turned away from these roads. The kings said that these Medes, returning from Egypt, were the first to bring the prophecy and to start the watching of the stars. When they passed away, it was continued by a disciple of Balaam and renewed 1,000 years after him by the three prophetess daughters of the three kings who founded their dynasties. Now, 500 years after them, the star had come which they were following in order to adore the newborn king. All this they explained to the inquisitive listeners with the most childlike sincerity, and were distressed that they did not seem at all to believe in what their ancestors had so patiently waited for during 2,000 years. In the evening the star was covered in mist, but when it appeared again at night large and clear between moving clouds, they rose from their camp and awoke the inhabitants living near to show them the star. These gazed in wonder at the sky, and some showed emotion, but many of them were vexed with the kings, and in general they merely sought to take advantage of their generosity. I heard the kings saying what a long way they had traveled from their first meeting place to here. They reckoned by days' journeys on foot, each of 12 hours. But their beasts, which were dromedaries and were faster than horses, enabled them to do 36 hours' journey each 24 hours, including the rest hours. Thus the most distant of the three kings was able to accomplish his 60 hours' journey to the meeting place in 2 days, and the two who were nearer did their 36 hours' journey in a day and a night. From the meeting place to where they were now they had traveled 672 hours' journey, and had spent about 25 days and nights, since starting off at the moment of the birth of Christ. December 20th and 21st, the kings and their train rested here both these days, and I heard what they told. On the evening of Friday the 21st the Jews who lived here began their Sabbath and crossed a bridge leading westwards across the water to a small Jewish village with a synagogue. At the same time the kings prepared for their departure and made their farewells. I noticed that the inhabitants looked at the star, when visible, which led the kings and expressed much astonishment, but it did not make them more respectful. They were shamelessly importunate, pestering the kings like swarms of wasps. In reply to their demands, the kings with great forbearance gave them little triangular pieces of their gold and also grains of some darker metal. They must have been very rich. They were escorted by the inhabitants when they left. Skirting the walls of the town, in which I saw temples surmounted by idols, they crossed the river by a bridge, and passed through the Jewish village, hurrying on towards the Jordan by a good road. From here they still had about 24 hours' journey to Jerusalem. December 22nd, the kings and their train left Mathania and hurried through the night, following a high road. They passed through no more towns, but skirted all the little places in which, at the end of July in the 3rd year of his ministry, Jesus blessed the children and healed and taught, for example, Bethabara, the place of the ferry across the Jordan, which they reached early in the morning. As it was the Sabbath, they met few people on their way. Early in the morning, at 7 o'clock, I saw them crossing the Jordan. Generally people were ferried across the river on a raft of beams, but for large companies a sort of bridge was put together. This was generally done by the ferrymen who lived on the bank and received payment for it, but as these could not work on the Sabbath, the travelers did it themselves, with the help of some of the ferrymen's heathen servants, who were paid for it. The Jordan was not broad here and was full of sandbanks. Planks were placed against the raft generally used for crossing, and the camels were led up them onto the raft. I saw that this sort of bridge was ferried backwards and forwards till all the train were landed on the western bank. It was quite a long time before all was safely across. They have left Jericho on their right and are now in a direct line with Bethlehem, but are turning more to the right in the direction of Jerusalem. There must be as many as 100 men with them. In the distance I see a little town, which I know, beside a stream coming from Jerusalem in an eastward direction. I am sure they will have to pass through this town. They go on for some time with the stream on their left hand. I saw Jerusalem as they went, it sank out of sight and reappeared as the road rose or fell. They did not pass through that town after all. They turned to the right towards Jerusalem. Today, Saturday evening, December 22nd, I saw the 3 holy kings and their train arriving before Jerusalem. I saw the city towering up to heaven. The guiding star had here almost disappeared, it had become quite small and glowed only dimly behind the city. The travelers became more and more depressed the nearer they came to Jerusalem, for the star was not nearly so bright before them, and in Judea they saw it but seldom. They had expected, too, to find everywhere great rejoicings and festivities at the newborn Saviour, for whose sake they had made so long a journey. When, however, they found nowhere the smallest trace of excitement about him, they were distressed and full of doubts, thinking that they had perhaps gone completely astray. Their train numbered, I am sure, more than 200 men, and took a quarter of an hour to pass by. A distinguished company had joined them as far back as Corsair, and since then others had been added. The 3 kings rode on dromedaries, camels with 2 humps, with baggage all round them, and there were 3 other loaded dromedaries with their riders. Each king was accompanied by 4 men of his tribe. Among them I noticed 2 young men. One of them was Azarias of Atam, whom I saw later as fathers of families when Jesus visited Arabia. The rest of the company rode mostly on very swift yellowish animals with delicate heads. I am not sure whether these were horses or donkeys. They looked quite different from our horses. The ones ridden by the more distinguished persons had richly ornamented saddles and bridles, and were hung with little gold chains and stars. Some of the company went up to the gate of the city and came back accompanied by guards and soldiers. Their arrival by this road with so large a train caused great surprise, as there was no festival and they were bringing no merchandise with them. When questioned, they explained why they had come, speaking of the star and the newborn child, but not a soul there understood what they were talking about. This depressed them extremely. They thought that they must certainly have made a mistake, for they could find nobody here who seemed to know anything about the Savior of the world. Everyone gazed at them in astonishment, and could not understand what they wanted. However, the gatekeepers went back into the city to report when they saw the generous alms given so kindly to the importunate beggars, and heard not only that the kings sought a lodging and would pay liberally, but also that they asked to speak with King Herod. Then followed an exchange of reports, messages, inquiries, and explanations between the kings and the authorities. While this was going on, the kings talked with the various people who had collected round them. Some of them had heard a rumor of a child said to have been born at Bethlehem, but it could not, they said, be he, for his parents were common people and poor. Others only laughed at them, and as they gathered, from what little the people said, that Herod knew nothing of a newborn child, and that, in general, they had no very high opinion of Herod, they became even more dejected, for they were troubled in their minds as to how to deal with the matter when speaking to Herod. However, calming themselves, they fell to praying and took courage again, saying to each other, He who has led us here so quickly by the star will bring us happily home again. When the gatekeepers at last came back, the kings and their train were taken round the outside of the city walls for some way and brought into it through a gate near Mount Calvary. They and their baggage animals were taken to a circular enclosure not far from the fish market. It was surrounded by houses and stables, and there were guards at the entrances. The animals were taken into the stables, while the kings established themselves in sheds near a fountain in the center of the court. The baggage animals were watered at this fountain. One side of this circular court was on the slope of a hill, the two other sides were open, with trees in front. Officials now came 2 by 2 with torches and examined what the kings had in their baggage. I suppose they were customs officers. Herod's palace was on higher ground, not far from here, and I saw the way thither illuminated with torches and braziers on poles. Herod sent a servant down and caused the oldest of the kings, Theochino, to be brought to his palace in secret. It was after 10 o'clock at night. He was received in a lower room by one of Herod's courtiers and questioned as to the object of his journey. He related everything in the most childlike manner, and begged him to ask Herod where to find the newborn king of the Jews whose star they had seen and followed in order to worship him. When the courtier reported this to Herod, he was much startled, but he dissembled and sent in reply a message saying that he would cause inquiries to be made, but that in the meantime the kings were to rest. Early next morning he would speak with them all himself and tell them what he had discovered. Theochino was thus unable to give his companions any special encouragement when he returned to them, and they made no preparations for resting, but on the contrary ordered the repacking of much that had been unpacked. I did not see them sleeping that night at all, they were wandering about separately in the city with guides, looking at the sky as if they were seeking for their star. In Jerusalem itself all was quiet, but there was much talk and coming and going at the guard-house before the court. The kings were of the opinion that Herod probably knew everything but wished to keep it secret from them. Herod was giving a feast when Theochino was in the palace. The rooms were illuminated and full of guests. among them brazen-faced women in fine dresses. Theochino's questions about a newborn king disturbed Herod greatly, and he at once summoned all the high priests and scribes. I saw them coming to him with their scrolls before midnight, wearing their priestly vestments and breastplates and their girdles with letters. I saw as many as 20 of them about him. He asked them where Christ was to be born, and I saw them unrolling their scrolls before him and answering, pointing with their fingers, in Bethlehem of Judah, for so it is written by the prophet Micaiah, "And thou Bethlehem in the land of Judah art not the least among the princes of Judah, for out of thee shall come forth the captain that shall rule my people Israel." Then I saw Herod walking about on the roof of the palace with some of them and looking in vain for the star of which Theochino had spoken. He was in a strange state of unrest, but the learned priests made every effort to persuade him not to pay any attention to what the kings had said. These romantic people, they said, were always full of fantastic ideas about their stars. If such a thing had really happened, Herod and they themselves, in the temple in the holy city, would of course be the first to know of it. Sunday, December 23rd, very early this morning Herod secretly summoned the 3 kings to his palace. They were received under an archway and taken into a room, where I saw green branches and bushes arranged in vases to welcome them, with some refreshments. They remained standing for a while until Herod came in, and then, after bowing before him, they again asked him about the newborn king of the Jews. Herod concealed his uneasiness as well as he could and even pretended to be overjoyed. He still had some of the scribes with him. He inquired of the kings as to what they had seen, and Mensa described to him the last picture they had seen in the stars before setting off on their journey. This, he said, was a virgin with a child before her. On the right-hand side of the picture a branch of light grew forth, bearing on it a tower with several gates. This tower had grown into a great city, over which the child had appeared as a king with crown, sword, and scepter. They had then seen themselves and the kings of the whole world come and bow down before the child in adoration, for his kingdom was to conquer all other kingdoms. Herod told them that a prophecy of this kind about Bethlehem Ephratah did indeed exist and asked them to go there at once very quietly, and when they had found and adored the child, to come back and bring him word, that he, too, might go and adore him. The kings, who had not touched any of the food set out for them by Herod, went back again. It was very early, for I saw the torches in front of the palace still alight. Herod spoke to them in secret because of all the talk in the city. The day then began to break, and they made all preparations for their departure. The stragglers who had followed them to Jerusalem had dispersed about the city the night before. Herod was in a state of ill humor and vexation in these days. At the time of Christ's birth he had been in his palace near Jericho, and had committed a vile murder. He had insinuated adherents of his into the higher posts of the temple to find out what was going on there so as to warn him of anyone opposed to his designs. One of these in particular was a high official in the temple, a good and upright man. He invited this man with friendly words to visit him at Jericho, but caused him to be waylaid and murdered in the desert on his way there, making it appear as the work of robbers. A few days later he came to Jerusalem in order to take part in the feast of the dedication of the temple on the 25th day of the month Kislev, and there he became involved in a very disagreeable affair. He wanted to do something in his own way which would please the Jews and do them honor. He had a golden image made of a lamb, or rather of a kid, for it had horns. This was to be set up for the festival over the gate leading from the outer court of the women into the court of sacrifice. He proposed to force this arrangement on the Jews and yet expected to be thanked for it. The priests opposed it, so he threatened them with fines, whereupon they declared that they would pay the fine, but that their law forbade them ever to accept the image. Herod, bitterly angered, tried to put up the image in secret, but when it was brought into the temple, it was seized by a zealous official and flung to the ground, so that it broke in two. A tumult ensued, and Herod had the official imprisoned. This affair had so angered him that he regretted coming to the feast. His courtiers endeavored to distract him with all kinds of entertainments. Now came the rumors of Christ's birth to add to Herod's uneasiness. Of late there had arisen among certain devout Jews a lively sense of the near approach of the Messiah. The events attending the birth of Jesus had been spread abroad by the shepherds, but all this was looked on by important people as nonsensical gossip. It had come to Herod's ears, and he had secretly made inquiries at Bethlehem. His messengers came to the crib 3 days after Christ's birth, and after talking with Saint Joseph, a poor man, they reported, as all arrogant people like them are wont to do, that there was nothing to be seen but a poor family in a miserable cave, and that the whole thing was not worth talking about. To begin with, they were too arrogant to talk properly to Saint Joseph, all the more as they had been warned not to cause any sensation. Now, however, Herod was suddenly confronted by the 3 kings and their numerous company, and was filled with fear and dismay, for they came from a long way off and their story could not be dismissed as idle talk. When however they inquired so particularly about the newborn king, he feigned a desire to worship him too, much to their joy. He was in no way reassured by the blind arrogance of the scribes, and was determined in his own interests that the event should remain as unnoticed as possible. He did not at once oppose the statements made to him by the kings, nor did he at once lay hands on Jesus, for by so doing he feared to give the impression to the people, who were already in a difficult frame of mind, that the king's announcement was true and of serious consequence to himself. He therefore planned to gain more accurate information from the kings before taking steps himself about it. When the kings, warned by God, failed to return to him, he announced that their flight was a proof that they had either been disappointed in their search or had been lying. He caused it to be spread abroad that they had been ashamed and afraid to come back, because they had so greatly deceived themselves and others. What other reason could there be for their secret flight, when they had been received by him in so friendly a manner? In this way he stopped all further rumors and merely let it be known in Bethlehem that no one should have anything to do with that family and that no attention should be paid to misleading rumors and imaginations. When the Holy Family returned to Nazareth a fortnight later, it put an end to the talk about an event which had never become clearly known to most people. The devout ones hoped in silence. When all was calm once more, Herod planned to do away with Jesus, but heard that the family with the child had now left Nazareth. For a long time he caused search to be made for the child, and when he was forced to give up hope of finding him, his anxiety increased, and he had recourse to the desperate measure of the massacre of the innocents. He took stringent precautions and ordered a number of troop movements in order to prevent any insurrection. I think the children were murdered in 7 different places. I saw the kings and their train moving southwards out of the city gate. A crowd of people followed them as far as a brook outside the walls, and then turned back. After crossing the stream, the kings made a short halt to look for their star. When they saw it they broke into cries of joy, and went on their journey, singing their sweet songs. The star did not lead them by the direct road to Bethlehem, but by a westerly detour. They passed by a little town I know well, and towards midday I saw them stop in a pleasant place near a little village behind the town. A spring of water burst forth before their eyes, at which they were overjoyed. They dismounted and hollowed out a basin round the spring, surrounding it with clean sand, stones, and turf. They stayed several hours here, watering and feeding their beasts, and refreshing themselves with food, for in Jerusalem they had been too disturbed and anxious to rest. In later years I saw our Lord stopping sometimes by this spring with his disciples and teaching there. The star, which at night shone like a ball of fire, now looked like the moon in daylight. It was not a perfect round, but had as it were a jagged edge. I often saw it hidden by clouds. The direct road from Jerusalem to Bethlehem was full of travelers with donkeys and baggage, probably returning home from Bethlehem after the taxation, or going to the market or the temple in Jerusalem. The way taken by the kings was very quiet, and no doubt God led them by it so that they should not cause too much sensation and should not arrive in Bethlehem before the evening. When the sun was already low, I saw them starting off again. They traveled in the same order as when they first met. Mensa, the brownish one and the youngest, went first, then came Ser, the dark brown one, and then Theochino, the white-skinned one and the eldest. Today, Sunday, December 23rd, at dusk, I saw the three holy kings and their train arrive at the same building outside Bethlehem where Joseph and Mary had been registered. It was the former ancestral house of David, of which some masonry still remained. Once it had belonged to Joseph's parents. It was a large house with several smaller ones round it. In front of it was a closed court, giving on to an open place with trees and a fountain. In this place I saw Roman soldiers. They were there because of the tax office which was in the building. When the kings and their train arrived, a crowd of inquisitive onlookers began pressing round them. The star had disappeared, and they were somewhat uneasy. Some men came up to them and questioned them. They dismounted, and were met by officials from the house bearing branches, who offered them a light refreshment of bread, fruit, and drink. This was a usual welcome for strangers like these. Meanwhile I saw their beasts being watered at the fountain under the trees. I thought to myself, these strangers are more courteously received than poor Joseph, because of the little gold pieces they distribute. They were told that the Shepherd's Valley was a good camping place, but remained for some time undecided. I did not hear them ask for the newborn King of the Jews. They knew that according to the prophecy this was the place, but because of what Herod had said to them they were afraid of causing any comment. When, however, they saw a light shining in the sky beside Bethlehem, as though the moon were rising, they mounted again and rode beside a ditch and some ruined walls round the south side of Bethlehem towards the east, approaching the cave of the Nativity from the field where the angels had appeared to the shepherds. On entering the valley behind the cave, near the grave of Marahah, they dismounted, and their people unpacked much of the luggage and set up a great tent which they had with them. They made all arrangements for an encampment with the help of some shepherds, who had pointed out the places to them. The camp had been partly arranged when the kings saw the star appear bright and clear above the hill where the cave of the Nativity was, the light that streamed from it descending in a vertical line onto the hill. The star seemed to grow larger as it drew near until it became a body of light which looked to me as big as a sheet. I saw them at first gazing at it in great astonishment. It was already dark, they saw no house, only the outline of a hill, like a rampart. Suddenly they were filled with great joy, for they saw in the radiance the shining figure of a child, like the one they had seen before in the star. All bared their heads in obeisance, and the three kings, going up to the hill, found the door of the cave. Mensa opened the door and saw the cave full of heavenly light, and in the back of it the Virgin sitting with the child, just as they had seen them in their visions. He went back at once and told this to his companions. In the meantime Joseph, accompanied by an aged shepherd, came out of the cave to meet them. They told him, in childlike simplicity, how they had come to adore the newborn King of the Jews, whose star they had seen, and to bring him gifts. Joseph welcomed them warmly, and the old shepherd accompanied them to their encampment and helped them with their arrangements. Some of the shepherds who were there gave them the use of some sheds. They themselves prepared for the solemn ceremony that was before them. I saw them putting on big white cloaks with long trains. The material had a yellowish sheen, like raw silk, and was beautifully fine and light. They wore these fluttering robes for all their religious ceremonies. All three wore girdles on which many pouches and gold boxes, like sugar basins with knobs, were suspended by little chains among the ample folds of their cloaks. Each of the kings was followed by 4 members of his family. Besides these there were several of Mensa's servants holding a small tablet like a tray, a rug with tassels, and some strips of thin stuff. They followed Saint Joseph in an ordered procession to the shelter at the entrance of the cave, where they covered the tray with the tasseled rug. Each king then placed on it some of the golden boxes and vessels which he took from his girdle. This was the offering which they made in common. Mensa and all the others took their sandals from off their feet, while Joseph opened the door of the cave. 2 youths from Mensa's following went before him, spreading out a strip of stuff on the floor of the cave before his feet and then retiring. 2 others came close behind him with the tray of presents, which he took from them when he was before the Blessed Virgin, and falling on his knee placed them at her feet on a low stand. Those who had carried the tray went back. Behind Mensa stood the 4 members of his family, humbly bowing down. Sarah and Theochino with their followers stood at the entrance and under the shelter outside. They were all as though drunk with ecstasy and seemed transfused by the light which filled the cave, though no light was there save the light of the world. Mary was lying, rather than sitting, on a carpet to the left of the infant Jesus. She was leaning on her arm. The child lay in a trough covered with a rug and raised on a high stand, opposite the entrance to the cave and at the place where he was born. As the kings entered, the Blessed Virgin raised herself into a sitting position, covered herself with a veil and took the infant Jesus onto her lap under her ample veil. When Mensa knelt down and spoke touching words of homage as he put down his presents, humbly bowing his bared head and crossing his hands on his breast, Mary undid the red and white wrappings from the upper part of the child's body, which gleamed softly from behind her veil. She supported his head with one hand and held him with the other. He was holding his little hands before his breast as if in prayer. He was shining with welcome, and now and then made friendly little gestures with his hands. Oh, what heavenly peace surrounds the prayers of these good men from the East! As I saw them, I said to myself, how clear and untroubled are their hearts, as full of goodness and innocence, as the hearts of pious children. There is nothing violent in them, and yet they are all fire and love. I am dead, I am a spirit, otherwise I could not see it, for it is not happening now, and yet it is now, for it is not in time, in God is no time, in God everything is present. I am dead, I am a spirit. As these strange thoughts came to me, I heard myself being told, "What is that to thee? Be not troubled, look, and praise the Lord who is eternal and in whom are all things." I now saw Mensa bringing out of a pouch hanging at his girdle a handful of little thick shining bars. They were as long as one's finger, pointed at the top, and speckled with little gold-colored grains in the middle. He offered these to Our Lady as his gift, laying them humbly on her knee beside the child. She accepted the gold with loving gratitude, and covered it with a corner of her cloak. These little bars of natural gold were Mensa's gift, because he was full of fidelity and love and was seeking for the holy truth with unshaken fervor and devotion. He then withdrew with his 4 companions, and Ser, the dark brown one, came forward with his following and, falling with great humility on both knees, offered his present with touching words of homage. This was a little golden incense boat full of little greenish grains of gum, which he laid on the table before the infant Jesus. Incense was his gift because he embraced the will of God, and followed it willingly, reverently, and lovingly. He knelt there for a long time with deep devotion before withdrawing. After him, came Theochino, the white-skinned one and the oldest. He was very old and heavy and was not able to kneel down, but he stood bowing low and placed on the table a golden vessel containing a delicate green plant. It seemed to be rooted. It was a tiny green upright tree, very delicate, bearing curly foliage with little delicate white flowers. It was myrrh. His gift was myrrh, because it symbolizes mortification and the overcoming of passions, for this good man had conquered extreme temptations to commit idolatry, polygamy, and to give way to violence. He remained standing in deep emotion before the infant Jesus with his attendants for a very long time, and I grew sorry for the other servants before the crib having to wait so long to see the child. The addresses made by the kings and their followers were extremely touching and childlike. As they knelt down and offered their presents, they said, "We have seen his star, we have seen that he is king over all kings, and we come to worship him and to pay him homage with our gifts," or something like this. They seemed to be in an ecstasy, and with childlike and rapturous prayers committed to the infant Jesus themselves and their families, their lands and their peoples, all their goods and possessions and everything of value that they owned. They besought the newborn king to accept their hearts and souls and all their thoughts and deeds, begging him to enlighten them and to grant them every virtue and, while they were on earth, happiness, peace, and love. While thus praying, they were overflowing with loving humility, and tears of joy coursed down their cheeks and beards. They were blissfully happy. They thought that they had now reached the very star for which their ancestors had watched for centuries with faithful yearning. All the joy of promises fulfilled after many centuries was theirs. The Mother of God accepted all these gifts with humble gratitude. At first she said nothing, but a gentle movement under her veil showed the joy and emotion that she felt. The child's bare body, which she had wrapped in her veil, seemed to shine from under her cloak. Afterwards she spoke a few, friendly, humble words of gratitude to each king, throwing her veil back a little as she did so. "Ah," I said to myself, "I have been given another lesson." With what sweet and loving gratitude she accepts each gift, she, who needs naught, who possesses Jesus himself, accepts with humility every loving gift. From this I can surely learn how loving gifts should be received. I, too, in future will accept every kindness with thankfulness and all humility. How kind Mary and Joseph are! They kept nothing at all for themselves, but gave it all away to the poor. When the kings with their attendants had left the cave and gone to their encampment, their servants came in. They had put up the tent, unloaded the baggage animals and, after arranging everything, were waiting in patient humility before the entrance. There must have been at least 30 of them, as well as a host of boys who had nothing on but loincloths and little cloaks. The servants always came in fives, led by one of the important personages to whom they belonged. They knelt round the child and venerated him in silence. Afterwards the boys came in all together, knelt round and worshipped the infant Jesus with childlike innocence and joy. The servants did not stay long in the cave, for the kings came back again, making a solemn entry this time. They had put on other cloaks of thin stuff which floated round them in ample folds. They carried censers in their hands and censed with great reverence the child and the Blessed Virgin and Saint Joseph and the whole cave, withdrawing afterwards with low obeisances. This was a customary form of worship amongst these people. During all this Mary and Joseph were as full of sweet joy as I ever saw them. Tears of happiness often ran down their cheeks. The recognition, and solemn veneration of the infant Jesus, whom they had been obliged to lodge so poorly, and whose infinite glory was a secret hidden in their humble hearts, brought them endless consolation. By God's almighty providence they saw the child of the promise being given, in spite of the blindness of mankind, what they themselves could not give him, the worship of the great ones of the earth with all the sacred splendor due to him, prepared since centuries and sent from a far country. They worshipped Jesus with the holy kings, happy in the honor paid to him. The king's encampment was set up in the valley behind the cave, stretching as far as the tomb of Marahah. The beasts of burden were fastened in rows to posts between ropes. Beside the big tent, which was near the hill of the cave Eleph the Nativity, was an enclosure roofed with mats where part of the baggage was stored, though most of it was taken into Marahah's tomb. The stars had come out when all had left the crib, and they all assembled in a circle near the old terebinth tree which stood above Marahah's tomb and there, with solemn hymns, held their service to the stars. I cannot express how movingly their singing echoed through the quiet valley. For so many centuries their forebears had gazed at the stars, prayed and sung, and today all their yearning was fulfilled. They sang in raptures of gratitude and joy. Meanwhile Joseph, helped by 2 of the old shepherds, had set out a light meal in the king's tent. They brought plates with bread, fruit, honeycomb, bowls with vegetables, and flasks of balsam, arranging it all on a low table on a carpet. Joseph had got together all these provisions for the kings in the morning, having been forewarned of their arrival by the Blessed Virgin. When the kings and the members of their families returned to the tent after their evening hymn, I saw Joseph receiving them with great friendliness and begging them to be his guests and accept this modest meal. He reclined among them round the low table as they ate. He was not at all shy, and was so happy that he shed tears of joy. When I saw this, I thought of how my dead father, who was a poor peasant, was obliged to sit at table with so many grand people when I was clothed at the convent. He was very humble and simple and had dreaded this sorely, but afterwards he was so happy that he wept for joy. Without wanting it he became the guest of honor. After this slight meal Joseph left them. Some of the more important persons accompanying the kings betook themselves to an inn at Bethlehem, the others lay down to rest on their couches, spread out in a circle in the big tent. When Joseph returned to the crib, he put all the presents in a corner of the wall to the right of the crib, placing a screen before it so that what was kept there could not be seen. Anna's maidservant, who had remained behind to wait on the Blessed Virgin, had stayed all this time in the small side cave, of which the door was in the entrance to the cave of the Nativity. She did not come out until all had left the crib. She was very serious and modest. I never saw either the Holy Family or this maidservant showing any worldly pleasure at the sight of the king's gifts. Everything was accepted with humble gratitude, and given away again with gentle charity. When the kings had arrived that evening at the tax-collecting office in Bethlehem, I had seen a certain amount of disturbance there and much movement in the town. Some people followed the kings to the Valley of the Shepherds, but soon came back again. Afterwards, while the kings, radiant with holy joy, were worshipping and offering their gifts at the crib, I saw some Jews lurking at a distance in the country round and murmuring angrily, and then going about in Bethlehem spreading all kinds of rumors. These miserable men made me shed bitter tears. I was grieved at heart for the evil people who, nowadays as in those distant times, stand about muttering and grumbling and spreading lies in their wrath. Salvation is so close to them, and they thrust it from them. How unlike they are to the good kings who, in their trusting faith in the promise, have come from so far and have found salvation. How I pity the hard-hearted and blind. In Jerusalem during this day I saw Herod again with several scribes. They were reading from scrolls and talking of the statement made by the kings. Afterwards it was no more spoken of, as though the whole matter were to be ignored. Very early today I saw the kings and some of their followers pay separate visits to the infant Jesus, and the Blessed Virgin. During the whole day I saw them busy in their camp beside their beasts of burden distributing all kinds of things. They were full of joy and happiness, and gave away many gifts, as I have always seen done on joyful occasions. The shepherds who had rendered services to the kings and their train were given many presents, and I saw many poor people receiving gifts. I saw them hanging coverlets over the shoulders of some poor old women who crept up to them all bent. Several of the king's followers took a great liking to the Shepherd's Valley, wishing to stay there and join the shepherds. They submitted this wish to the kings, who allowed them to leave their service and gave them rich presents. They were given blankets, household utensils, grains of gold, and also the donkeys on which they had ridden. When I saw the kings distributing a quantity of bread, I at first wondered where so much bread came from. Then I remembered having seen that sometimes, when they halted, they used their provision of flour to bake little thin flat loaves like rusks in iron molds, which they carried with them. These loaves they packed tightly in light leather boxes, which they hung on their pack animals. Today many people came from Bethlehem and pestered the kings for gifts of all kinds. Some of these searched their baggage, and on various pretexts made greedy demands of them. Here, and in Jerusalem too, the sensation caused by their numerous following had been a great annoyance to the kings. They had arrived in a kind of triumphal procession, thinking to find general rejoicings over the newborn king, but after what had happened they now resolved to start their return journey quietly and with a smaller following, which would enable them to travel more rapidly. They therefore dismissed today many of their followers, some of whom remained behind in the Valley of the Shepherds, while others went on ahead to meeting places arranged beforehand. I was surprised to see how much their train had diminished by the evening. The kings no doubt intended to travel the next day to Jerusalem, and to tell Herod that they had found the child, but they wanted to do this more quietly, and this was why they sent many on ahead, thus making the journey easier. They and their dromedaries could overtake them without difficulty. In the evening they went to the crib to say farewell. Mensa went in first, alone. Mary placed the infant Jesus in his arms, he shed tears and his face was shining with joy. After him, the two others came and wept as they said farewell. They brought yet more gifts, many pieces of different stuffs, some looking like undyed silk, some red and some with flowered patterns, and a number of beautiful thin coverlets. They also left behind their ample, thin cloaks. These were pale yellow and seemed to be woven of the finest wool, they were so light that they moved with every breath of air. They also brought many bowls, standing one on the other, and boxes filled with grains, and a basket with pots of little delicate green bushes with small white flowers. There were 3 of these in the center of each pot, so arranged that another pot could be placed on the edge. The pots were built up above each other in the basket. This was myrrh. They also gave Joseph long narrow baskets containing birds. They had had a number of these hanging on their dromedaries for killing and eating. They all shed many tears, when they left the child and Mary. I saw the Blessed Virgin standing up beside them as they said farewell. She held the infant Jesus in her arms wrapped in her veil, and went a few steps with the kings towards the door of the cave. There she stood still, and in order to give these holy men a remembrance, she took from her head the thin yellow veil covering the infant Jesus and herself and handed it to Mensa. The kings received this gift with deep obeisances, and their hearts overflowed with awe and gratitude when they saw the Blessed Virgin standing before them unveiled with the infant Jesus. They were weeping with joy as they left the cave. Henceforth the veil was the holiest treasure that they possessed. The manner in which the Blessed Virgin accepted presents, although it did not show pleasure in the things themselves, was particularly touching in its humility, and in its real gratitude towards the giver. During this wonderful visit I saw in her no trace of self-interest, except that to begin with, out of love for the infant Jesus and out of pity for Joseph, she allowed herself in all simplicity the joy of hoping that now they might perhaps find a shelter in Bethlehem, and not be so contemptuously treated as on their arrival. She had been truly sorry for Joseph's distress and confusion at this. After the kings had said farewell it grew dark, and the lamp was lit in the cave. The kings went with their followers to the great old terebinth tree above Maraha's grave, there to hold their evening service as they had the day before. A lamp was burning beneath the tree. When they saw the stars coming out, they prayed and sang their sweet songs. The voices of the boys sounded particularly lovely among the others. After this they went into their tent, where Joseph had once more prepared a light meal for them, and then some returned to the inn in Bethlehem, while the rest lay down in the tent. At midnight I suddenly saw a vision. I saw the kings lying asleep in their tent on rugs, and I saw the appearance of a shining youth among them. It was an angel. Their lamp was burning, and I saw them sitting up, half asleep. The angel woke them and told them to leave immediately, and not to go by Jerusalem but through the desert round the Dead Sea. They sprang in haste from their couches, some hurried to rouse their followers, one went to the cave and woke Saint Joseph, who hastened to Bethlehem to summon those who were in the inn. These, however, met him on his way there, for they had had the same vision. The tent was taken down, packed, and the rest of the encampment removed, all with wonderful speed. While the kings were taking once more a touching farewell of Joseph before the crib, their followers were already hurrying southwards, through the desert of En-Gadi along the shores of the Dead Sea. They travelled in separate parties, so as to progress more quickly. The kings begged that the Holy Family should fly with them, for danger most certainly threatened them, or at least that Mary should hide herself with the child so as not to be molested because of them. They cried like children, embracing Joseph and speaking in the most moving manner. Then they mounted their dromedaries, which carried but little baggage, and hastened away across the desert. I saw the angel with them out in the fields, showing them their way. They seemed to be gone in an instant. They took different ways, about a quarter of an hour's distance apart from each other. First they went for an hour towards the east, and then southwards into the desert. Their way home led through the region which Jesus traversed on his return from Egypt in the 3rd year of his ministry. The angel had warned the kings just in time, for the authorities in Bethlehem, perhaps on a secret order from Herod, but I think from their own zeal of office, meant to arrest today the kings who were sleeping in the inn at Bethlehem and to imprison them in the cellars deep under the synagogue. They were then going to denounce them to Herod as disturbers of the peace. However, when their departure became known this morning, they were already near En-Gadi, and the valley where they had encamped was quiet and deserted as usual, with nothing but the trodden grass and a few tent poles to show that they had been there. In the meantime the appearance in Bethlehem of the kings and their train had caused a considerable stir. Some regretted that they had refused Joseph a lodging, others said that the kings were strange fanatical adventurers, while others connected their arrival with the rumors of what the shepherds had seen. The authorities of the place, perhaps as the result of a warning from Herod, but of this I am not sure, decided that steps must be taken to deal with the situation. In the center of the town, in an open place with a fountain surrounded by trees, I saw near the synagogue a large house with steps leading up to it. All the inhabitants were summoned to the square in front of the house, and I saw warning or command being given to them from the steps. They were told that all perverse talk and superstitious rumors must be stopped, and from now onwards there must be no more running backwards and forwards outside the town to the dwelling of the people who had been the cause of all this talk. After the assembled people had dispersed, I saw Saint Joseph summoned by 2 men and being examined in that house by some aged Jews. I saw him go back to the crib and then again go to the courthouse. When he went there the second time, he took with him some of the gold from the king's gifts and gave it to them, upon which they let him go in peace. It seemed to me that the whole examination was a sort of blackmail. I saw, too, that a path leading towards the crib was blocked by the authorities by felling a tree across it. This was not the path through the town gate, but the one which led over a hill or rampart to the cave of the Nativity from the place where Mary had waited under a big tree on arriving at Bethlehem. They even put up a guard-house by the tree, and stretched ropes across the road which were attached to a bell in the guard-house, so that they could hold up anyone who tried to pass. In the afternoon I saw a band of 16 of Herod's soldiers talking to Joseph. They were probably sent on account of the kings, who had been accused of being disturbers of the peace. Finding, however, everything quiet and lonely, with nobody but a poor family in the cave, and having been warned not to alarm these in any way, they went quietly back to report what they had found. The presents and other things left by the kings had been hidden away by Joseph partly in Marah's grave and partly in some secret places in the hill of the cave of the Nativity, which he knew of since his boyhood when he had often hidden there from his brothers. These separate hiding places dated from the time of the patriarch Jacob, who had once set up his tents here on this hill. At that time there were only a few tents on the site of Bethlehem. This next section about the three kings is from earlier in her writings. It goes over more of the history. She states, quote, "I saw also that by the great mercy of God it was announced to certain God-fearing heathens that the Messiah was to be born from a virgin in Judea. The ancestors of the three holy kings, the star worshippers of Chaldea, received this message by the appearance of a picture in a star or in the sky, by which they made prophecies. When in my great dream journey I came into the promised land, I saw all those things which I have related about the conception of the Blessed Virgin. Thereupon I entered into the daily visions of our Lord's ministry and had today reached the 8th of December of the 3rd year of his teaching. I found Jesus not in the promised land, but was brought by my guide eastwards over the Jordan to Arabia, where the Lord, accompanied by 3 young men, was in a tent city of the 3 holy kings in which they had settled after their return from Bethlehem. I saw that the 2 holy kings who were still alive were celebrating with their tribe a 3-day feast starting from today, December 8th. On this night, 15 years before Christ's birth, they had seen for the first time the star promised by Balaam rise in the sky. A star shall rise out of Jacob, the star for which they and their forefathers had waited so long, scanning the heavens in patient watchfulness. They discerned in it the picture of a virgin, bearing in one hand a scepter and in the other a balance. The scales were held even by a perfect ear of wheat in the one and by a cluster of grapes in the other. Therefore every year since their return from Bethlehem they kept a 3-day feast beginning with this day. I saw, too, that as a result of this vision on the day of the conception of Mary, 15 years before the birth of Christ, these star worshippers did away with a terrible religious custom of theirs, a cruel sacrifice of children, long practiced among them as the result of revelations which had been misunderstood by them and confused by evil influences. They had carried out at different times and in different manners sacrifices of both children and grown people. I saw that before Mary's conception they had the following custom. They took a child of one of the purest and most devout mothers amongst the followers of their religion, and she esteemed herself very fortunate to offer up her child in this way. The child was flayed and strewn with flour to absorb the blood. They ate this blood-soaked flour as a holy repast, and continued strewing the flour and eating until there was no blood left in the child's body. Finally the child's flesh was cut up into small pieces, which were distributed among them and eaten. I saw them performing this gruesome ceremony with the greatest simplicity and devoutness, and I was told that they had adopted this dreadful practice as a result of misunderstanding and distorting certain prophetic and symbolical indications which they had received regarding the Holy Eucharist. I saw that this terrible sacrifice was carried on in Chaldea, in the country of Mensa, one of the 3 holy kings, until he put an end to its horrors on receiving enlightenment in a vision from heaven on the day of Mary's conception. I saw him on a high wooden pyramidal edifice, engaged in studying the stars, as his people had done for centuries in accordance with their ancient traditions. I saw King Mensa lying in an ecstasy as he contemplated the stars, his limbs were rigid and he had lost consciousness. His companions came to him, and brought him back to himself, but at first he seemed not to know them at all. He had seen the picture in the star with the Virgin, the scales, the ear of corn, and the cluster of grapes, and had received an inner admonition, after which that cruel ceremony was abolished. After seeing at night in my sleep the fearful picture of the murdered child on my right hand, I turned over in horror in my bed, but saw it again on my left hand. I begged God most earnestly to free me from this dreadful sight. I woke up and heard the clock strike. My heavenly bridegroom said to me, pointing round him as he spoke, "See far more evil that befalls me every day at the hands of many throughout the whole world." And as I looked about me into the distance, many things came before my soul which were indeed still more dreadful than that sacrifice of children, for I saw Jesus himself cruelly sacrificed on the altar by unworthy and sinful celebrations of the holy mysteries. I saw how the blessed host lay on the altar before unworthy degenerate priests like a living child Jesus, whom they cut and terribly mutilated with the paten. Their sacrifice, though an efficacious celebration of the holy mysteries, appeared like a cruel murder. The same cruelty was shown to me in the heartless treatment of the members of Christ, his followers, and God's adopted children. I saw at the present time countless good, unhappy men being everywhere oppressed, tormented and persecuted, and I always saw that it was Jesus who suffered this ill treatment. The times are terrible, a refuge is no longer anywhere to be found, a dense cloud of sin lies over the whole world, and I see men giving way to the worst crimes with complete indifference and unconcern. I saw all this in many visions while my soul was being led through many lands over the whole earth. At last I came back to the visions of the feast of Our Lady's Conception. And this ends the video. Please remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons, pray the rosary every day, and please share these videos. Until next time, may our Lord bless you and Our Lady protect you under her mantle of mercy.
We three kings of Orient are, having gifts which traverse afar, field and fountain, moor and mountain, following your